The blood from her bare feet left crimson footprints on the fallen pine needles, but Grace Adams couldn't stop running through the dense Texas woods, her torn cotton dress catching on brambles as the August heat of 1883 made breathing feel like swallowing fire. Behind her, somewhere in the distance, she could hear her husband's voice calling her name with that deceptive sweetness that always preceded his fists, and her heart hammered so hard against her ribs she thought it might break through. The San Angelo woods had seemed like her only escape when she'd fled their small ranch house that morning after he'd nearly strangled her unconscious. And now the afternoon sun filtered through the canopy above, casting shadows that seemed to reach for her like grasping hands. She stumbled over a root and fell hard, her hands scraping against rough bark as she caught herself. The taste of copper filled her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue, and tears streamed down her face mixing with the dirt and sweat that covered her skin. Grace was 23 years old and had been married to Marcus for 3 years. 3 years that had slowly transformed from his charming courtship into a living nightmare where every word she spoke might trigger his rage. This morning had been different, though. This morning she'd seen something in his eyes that told her if she didn't run, she wouldn't survive another day. She heard a horse nearby and froze, pressing herself against the trunk of a massive oak tree, trying to make herself invisible. The animal's hooves crunched through the underbrush and she held her breath until her lungs burned. Then a voice cut through the forest, deep and steady, nothing like Marcus's volatile tone. "Madam, I can see you're hurt. I'm not going to harm you." Grace peered around the tree and saw a cowboy sitting atop a bay mare, his hat tilted back revealing dark hair and eyes that looked almost black in the dappled sunlight. He was young, maybe 26 or 27, with a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble and the kind of weathered tan that came from years working under the Texas sun. His shirt was dusty from the trail and a gun belt hung low on his hips, but his hands were raised slightly as if to show he meant no threat. "Please," Grace whispered, her voice cracking. "Please just go. If he finds you with me, he'll kill you." The cowboy dismounted slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of someone trying not to spook a wild animal. "Who's going to kill me? My husband. Marcus Adams. He's looking for me and he won't stop until he finds me. He'll kill anyone who helps me. You need to leave before he comes." The cowboy's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as he took in her appearance. Grace knew what he saw. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, purple and black bruises covered her arms, and her dress was ripped at the shoulder revealing more bruises across her collarbone. Her feet were bleeding and she was trembling like a leaf in a storm. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Grace," she managed. "Grace, I'm Samuel Ashford. I work the cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here, and I'm telling you right now your husband will never find you." Not if you don't want him to. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe those words. But she'd learned the hard way that promises meant nothing, that men could say anything and do the opposite. "You don't understand. Marcus knows everyone in San Angelo. He has friends. The sheriff is his drinking buddy. No one will help me against him." Samuel took a step closer, his boots barely making a sound on the forest floor. "Then we won't stay in San Angelo. I've got a stake saved up, been planning to head west to start my own ranch. Was just waiting for the right time. Seems like now might be that time. You don't even know me. Why would you throw away your life for a stranger?" His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because I know what it's like to feel helpless. My mother, she was in a situation like yours when I was a boy. My father drank, and when he drank, he used his fists. One night he went too far and she didn't wake up the next morning. I was 12 years old and I couldn't stop it. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in her position, I wouldn't turn away. The raw honesty in his voice cracked something inside Grace, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Don't be sorry for me. Let me help you, please. Before Grace could respond, they both heard it. Marcus's voice, much closer now, calling her name with increasing anger. Grace, Grace, you get back here right now. You're making this worse for yourself. Samuel's hand moved to his gun instinctively, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he moved quickly to Grace's side and spoke in a low, urgent tone. Can you ride? She nodded. Then get on my horse. We're going to move quietly through the woods until we're far enough away, then we'll ride hard. I've got a lined shack about 15 miles from here where we can rest and figure out our next move. Trust me, Grace. He'll never find you. Grace looked into Samuel's eyes and saw something she hadn't seen in years, genuine kindness without expectation of anything in return. She let him help her onto the mare, and he swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. His touch was gentle, careful not to press against her bruises, and when the horse started moving through the woods at a quiet walk, she found herself leaning back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. They moved through the forest like ghosts, Samuel guiding the mare around fallen branches and through clearings where the pine needles muffled the sound of hooves. Marcus's voice grew more distant, then faded entirely, and only then did Samuel urge the horse into a faster pace. They rode for what felt like hours, the landscape gradually changing from dense woods to more open grassland, dotted with mesquite and juniper. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when they finally reached the lined shack, a small, rough-hewn cabin that sat alone on the prairie like a forgotten toy. Samuel helped Grace down from the horse, and she winced as her injured feet touched the ground. Without a word, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her inside, setting her gently on the single cot that served as the cabin's only furniture besides a small table and chair. I'm going to tend to your feet, he said, pulling out a worn saddlebag and extracting a flask of whiskey and some clean cloth. This is going to hurt. Grace nodded, biting her lip as he carefully cleaned the cuts and scrapes on her feet. His hands were surprisingly gentle for someone who clearly worked with rough cattle and rope, and he talked softly as he worked, telling her about the ranch where he worked, about the wild mustangs he'd seen running across the plains, about anything and everything except what she'd just escaped from. When he finished, he poured her some water from his canteen and pulled out some jerky and hardtack. It's not much, but it'll keep your strength up. Why are you doing this? Grace asked again, taking the food gratefully. You're risking everything. Samuel sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the wall, and removed his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair. Because it's the right thing to do. Because no woman should have to live in fear. Because when I look at you, I see someone who's survived something that would have broken most people, and that takes a kind of courage most men will never have. I don't feel courageous. I feel like a coward who should have left years ago. The fact that you left at all makes you brave. A lot of women never find the strength. They talked as darkness fell outside the cabin, and Samuel lit a small lantern that cast warm, golden light across the rough wooden walls. Grace found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone, telling him about her childhood on a small farm near Austin, about her parents who died of fever when she was 19, about how Marcus had seemed like salvation when he'd courted her, offering stability and a home when she had nothing. He wasn't always cruel, she said quietly. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't see it. The first time he hit me was 2 months after our wedding. He said I'd embarrassed him in front of his friends by speaking out of turn. He apologized afterward, bought me flowers, swore it would never happen again. But it did happen again, and again. Each time was worse than the last. Samuel's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained calm. That's not your fault. Men like him, they're good at hiding what they are until they've got you trapped. What happens now? Grace asked, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept her running was fading and every inch of her body ached. Now you rest. Tomorrow we'll ride for Fort Concho. I've got friends there, good men who won't ask questions. We can get you proper medical attention, and I can wire some contacts about work further west. Maybe New Mexico Territory or Arizona. Somewhere Marcus Adams will never think to look. You'd leave everything for a stranger. You're not a stranger anymore, Grace. And besides, I told you I've been planning to move west anyway. This just gives me a reason to do it sooner rather than later. Grace lay back on the cot, and Samuel draped his bedroll over her like a blanket. What about you? Where will you sleep? I'll keep watch. Make sure no one comes around. You sleep, Grace. You're safe now. She wanted to protest, but her eyes were already closing, her body demanding rest after the trauma of the day. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sight of Samuel sitting by the door, his rifle across his lap, silhouetted against the lantern light like a guardian angel sent to watch over her. Grace woke several times during the night, each time panicking until she remembered where she was. Each time, Samuel was there, sometimes by the door, sometimes sitting by the small window, always alert. Once, when she cried out from a nightmare, he was beside her in an instant, speaking soft, reassuring words until her breathing calmed and her heart stopped racing. Dawn came slowly, painting the Texas sky in shades of pink and gold. Samuel made coffee over a small fire outside, and the smell woke Grace fully. She sat up carefully, her body stiff and sore, and found that he'd left her a clean shirt of his to wear. It was far too large, but it was better than her torn dress. When she emerged from the cabin, Samuel looked up and smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Morning. Coffee will be ready in a minute. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by cattle," Grace admitted, trying to return his smile and wincing when it pulled at her split lip. "But alive. Thanks to you." They ate a simple breakfast of more hardtack and some beans Samuel had stashed in the cabin, and then he saddled up the mare. "Fort Concho is about a day's ride from here. We'll take it slow because of your injuries. Maybe stop at a creek I know to let you wash up and rest the horse." The ride that day was different from the desperate flight through the woods. Samuel kept the mare at an easy pace, and he told Grace stories about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope cattle from an old Mexican vaquero named Esteban, who taught him everything he knew. He talked about the wild beauty of the land, about thunderstorms that rolled across the plains like armies of gods, about the first time he'd broken a wild horse and the pride he'd felt. Grace found herself watching him as he talked, noticing the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he held the reins, the easy confidence in the way he sat a horse. He was nothing like Marcus. Where her husband had been volatile and unpredictable, Samuel seemed steady as a rock. Where Marcus had used his strength to intimidate and harm, Samuel seemed almost careful with his power, aware of it but restrained. They stopped at the creek around midday, and Samuel gave Grace privacy to wash in a shallow pool while he tended to the horse and kept watch. The cool water felt like heaven on her bruised skin, and she carefully cleaned her wounds, watching the dried blood swirl away in the current. She stayed in longer than necessary, letting the water soothe her aches, and when she finally emerged, she felt almost human again. Samuel had caught some fish while she bathed, and he cooked them over a fire, the the smell making Grace's stomach growl. They ate sitting on the creek bank, their feet dangling in the water, and for the first time in 3 years, Grace felt something like peace settle over her. "What was it like, working on a cattle ranch?" she asked, watching a hawk circle overhead. "Hard work, but honest," Samuel replied, picking at his fish. "I started as a hand when I was 15 after my father died. Learned the trade from the ground up. Branding, roping, driving cattle to market. It's a good life if you don't mind the sun and the dirt and the occasional ornery steer trying to gore you. Do you miss it? I mean, will you miss it when we leave?" He looked at her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "I'll miss some of the men I worked with. But the West is full of cattle and ranches needing hands. I'm not worried about finding work. I'm more concerned about making sure you're truly safe. Samuel, I can't let you give up everything for me. Once we get to Fort Concho, I can figure something out on my own." "And go where? Do what?" "Grace, I'm not trying to control your choices, but be practical. You've got no money, no family, and a husband who's probably putting out word all over Tom Green County looking for you. You need help, and I'm offering it freely. No strings attached. But why?" "I still don't understand why you do this for me." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, watching the water flow past. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I told you about my mother. What I didn't tell you was that there were people who could have helped her. Neighbors who heard the fights, who saw the bruises. But nobody wanted to get involved. They said it wasn't their business, that what happened between a man and his wife was private. And so she died, alone and afraid, and I couldn't do a damn thing about it. I won't be like those neighbors, Grace. I won't turn away when I have the power to help." Grace felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they weren't from fear or pain. She reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the grass. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you lost her that way." Samuel turned his hand over and gently squeezed her fingers. "Me too. But maybe some good can come from that tragedy. Maybe I can help save you, and that can mean something." They sat like that for a while, hands joined, not speaking, just listening to the creek burble past and the wind rustle through the grass. Grace couldn't remember the last time she'd held hands with someone and felt safe, felt valued. With Marcus, every touch had become something to endure, something that might turn violent without warning. But Samuel's hand was warm and calloused and gentle, and it anchored her to this moment, to the possibility that life could be different. When they finally mounted up again and continued toward Fort Concho, Grace rode in front of Samuel with a little less tension in her shoulders. The afternoon stretched long and hot, but the landscape had its own harsh beauty. They passed through areas where wildflowers still bloomed despite the summer heat, bright splashes of color against the brown grass. They saw a herd of pronghorn in the distance, their white markings flashing as they bounded away. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Samuel pointed toward a dark smudge on the horizon. "That's Fort Concho. We'll be there within the hour." True to his word, they rode through the gates of the fort just as the last light was fading from the sky. The guard on duty recognized Samuel and waved them through without question. Samuel guided the mare to a small house near the edge of the fort grounds and dismounted, helping Grace down carefully. "This is where my friend Daniel lives. He's a scout for the army, a good man. His wife Mary is a nurse. They'll help you." The door opened before Samuel could knock, and a woman with kind eyes and graying hair looked out. "Samuel Ashford, as I live and breathe. What brings you to the fort at this hour?" Then her eyes fell on Grace, and her expression shifted immediately to concern. "Oh, my dear, come inside. Daniel, get the medical kit." Within minutes, Grace found herself sitting in a comfortable chair while Mary tended to her injuries with professional efficiency, clucking her tongue at each new bruise she discovered. Daniel, a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an easier manner, talked quietly with Samuel in the corner of the room. "She can stay here as long as she needs," Mary declared, applying a salve to the worst of Grace's bruises. "We've got a spare room and I won't hear any arguments about it." "I don't want to impose," Grace started, but Mary waved her off. "Nonsense. Any friend of Samuel's is welcome here, and besides, you need proper rest and care. Those feet alone will take at least a week to heal properly." Over the next few days, Grace stayed with Mary and Daniel while Samuel made arrangements for their journey west. He visited every day, bringing news and small gifts: a new dress that actually fit, sturdy boots for her healing feet, a brush for her hair. Each gift was given matter-of-factly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and each one made Grace's heart swell with gratitude and something else, something she was afraid to name. They talked for hours, sitting on the porch of Daniel and Mary's house in the evenings when the heat finally broke. Samuel told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch, of raising horses instead of cattle, of building something that was truly his. Grace talked about her own dreams, dreams she'd buried under years of fear, of maybe running a boarding house or learning to be a teacher. "You could do both," Samuel said one evening, his chair tilted back against the wall. "Run a ranch and teach. Lots of settlements out west need teachers, and ranch work keeps you busy but not all the time. You'd have space to do both." "Is that what we're doing? Running a ranch together?" Grace asked, her heart beating faster. Samuel brought his chair down and looked at her seriously. "Grace, I know we've only known each other less than a week. I know you're running from a nightmare and probably not thinking clearly about anything beyond surviving. But I need to be honest with you. When I look at you, I don't just see someone I'm helping. I see someone I want to know better. Someone I could see myself building a life with, if you'd want that too." Grace's breath caught. She'd promised herself she'd never trust another man, never give anyone that kind of power over her life again. But Samuel wasn't like Marcus. He'd proven that over and over in the way he treated her, in the way he asked her opinion on their plans, in the way he never pushed or demanded, only offered and waited for her answer. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that I'm making another mistake. Scared that I don't know how to trust my own judgment anymore." "That's fair," Samuel said, reaching out slowly and taking her hand only when she didn't pull away. "But here's what I'm proposing. We head west together as partners. I'll teach you about ranching. You can pursue whatever interests you have. We'll build something together as friends first. And if over time it becomes something more, then we'll face that when we get there. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people helping each other start over." "Why would you settle for that? You could find someone else, someone without all my damage and complications." Samuel's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I don't want someone else. I want you, Grace. Even if all we ever are is friends and partners, that's enough for me. You're enough for me." The tears came then, hot and fast, but they were different from the tears she'd cried before. These were tears of relief, of hope, of the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could have a second chance at happiness. She let Samuel pull her into his arms, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. He held her carefully, giving her all the space she needed to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't want to. She wanted to stay right there in the circle of his arms, in the safety of his embrace. "Okay," she whispered. "Partners." She felt him smile against her hair. "Partners." 2 weeks later, after her injuries had healed enough for travel, and Samuel had made all the arrangements, They set out west with a wagon loaded with supplies, 2 horses, and a carefully drawn map that would take them to New Mexico territory. Mary had tearfully said goodbye, pressing a package of food and medical supplies into Grace's hands and whispering, "You take care of each other now." The journey took nearly a month, traveling slowly to account for the summer heat and the rough terrain. They passed through small settlements and wide open country, through canyons where the rocks glowed red in the sunset and across rivers that ran cool and clear. Samuel taught Grace how to handle a rifle, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to find water in dry country. Grace surprised herself by taking to the outdoors life more naturally than she'd expected. At night, they'd make camp, and Samuel would sleep on one side of the fire while Grace slept on the other, always respectful of the distance she needed. But slowly, gradually, that distance began to shrink. Grace found herself sitting closer to Samuel as they ate their evening meals. She'd reach for his hand when they walked, drawing comfort from his solid presence. He'd tuck a strand of hair behind her ear when the wind blew it loose, his touch sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. One evening, about 3 weeks into their journey, they made camp near a small grove of cottonwood trees, the sound of a nearby stream providing a peaceful backdrop. Samuel had shot a rabbit that afternoon, and it was roasting over the fire, the smell making Grace's mouth water. She sat on a fallen log, watching him tend the fire, admiring the easy competence of his movements. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, glancing up and catching her staring. "About how different things are from a month ago, how different I am." He came and sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "How so?" "I feel alive again, like I'd been buried under something heavy and dark, and now I can finally breathe. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Samuel turned to face her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Grace, I want to kiss you, but only if that's something you want to, and if it's not, that's completely fine. Nothing between us has to change." Grace's heart hammered in her chest, but this time it wasn't from fear. She looked at Samuel's face, at the kindness and patience written in every line, and she realized she wanted this. She wanted him. Not because she needed protection or rescue, but because he was Samuel, and he made her feel things she'd thought Marcus had beaten out of her forever. "I want that too," she said softly. Samuel cupped her face gently with both hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones, and then he kissed her. It was nothing like the demanding, aggressive kisses Marcus had forced on her. This was tender and sweet, a question instead of a demand, and Grace found herself melting into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little harder, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Grace Adams. I think I have been since the moment I saw you in those woods. I know it's fast. I know you might not be ready, but I needed you to know." Grace felt something break open inside her chest, something warm and golden and terrifying in its intensity. "I think I'm falling in love with you too. And that scares me more than anything." "Why?" "Because what if I'm wrong again? What if I'm just latching onto the first kind man I meet? What if this is just gratitude and not real?" Samuel pulled back enough to look her in the eyes. "Grace, what you feel is what you feel, and it's real whether it lasts forever or changes tomorrow. But I want you to know something. I'm not your husband. I will never raise my hand to you. I will never make you feel small or afraid. If we do this, if we build a life together, it's as equals. Your voice matters, your choices matter, you matter. And if someday you wake up and decide this isn't what you want anymore, I'll be heartbroken, but I'll respect it. You're not trapped with me. You're free to choose every single day." The tears came again, but Grace was smiling through them. "How are you real? How do men like you exist in the same world as men like Marcus? I don't know, but I thank God I found you in those woods that day." They kissed again, longer this time, and when Samuel suggested they share a bedroll that night just to sleep, just to be close, Grace agreed. She fell asleep wrapped in his arms, feeling safer than she had in years. And for the first time since her wedding night, she slept through until morning without nightmares. The rest of the journey passed in a haze of growing intimacy and deepening affection. They arrived in New Mexico Territory in late September of 1883, finding a valley with good grass and water near a small settlement called Silver Creek. Samuel used his savings to file a claim on a section of land, and they immediately set to work building their new life. The first structure was a simple dugout carved into a hillside, just enough to provide shelter while they built a proper house. They worked side by side, Grace proving herself stronger and more capable than either of them had expected. She learned to mix mortar and lay stone, to saw timber and drive nails. Samuel taught her everything he knew about building and ranching, always patient when she made mistakes, always encouraging when she succeeded. The small settlement welcomed them cautiously at first, but when Samuel introduced Grace as his partner, not his wife, there were some raised eyebrows. Finally, on a cool October evening as they sat in front of their nearly completed cabin, Samuel brought it up. "People in town are talking. Wondering why we're not married." Grace felt her stomach tighten. "Does that bother you?" "Only if it bothers you." "Grace, I meant what I said about being equals. If you want to get married, I'd be honored. If you don't, if the whole institution feels tainted to you now, I understand. We can just be partners, and to hell with what anyone else thinks." Grace was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars come out one by one in the darkening sky. Finally, she said, "I want to marry you, but I'm still legally married to Marcus. I don't even know if he's looking for me anymore, or if he's given up, or if he's told people I'm dead. How can we marry when I'm already married?" Samuel took her hand. "We'll figure it out. Maybe we can find a lawyer who knows about divorce law. Maybe we'll have to go back to Texas and face him down. Whatever it takes, we'll do it right. I won't have you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life." It took another 6 months, but through a lawyer in Santa Fe, they learned that Marcus Adams had told everyone in San Angelo that Grace had died in an accident. He'd even held a small funeral, though of course there was no body. The lawyer advised that while Marcus's claim of her death wasn't legal, it did mean they could pursue a divorce on grounds of abandonment and abuse, without Marcus likely contesting it, since doing so would expose his lie. The divorce proceedings took another 8 months, conducted mostly through correspondence and legal filings. During that time, Grace and Samuel finished their cabin, bought a small herd of horses, and started their ranch. Grace also began teaching reading and writing to the children in Silver Creek, holding classes in the settlement's meeting hall 3 days a week. She discovered she loved teaching, loved seeing children's faces light up when they mastered a new skill. In June of 1885, nearly 2 years after Grace had fled into those Texas woods, a letter arrived declaring her legally divorced from Marcus Adams. Samuel found her sitting on the porch of their cabin, the letter in her hands, crying. He dropped to his knees in front of her chair, taking her hands. "Grace, what's wrong? What happened?" She looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks and the biggest smile he'd ever seen on her face. "I'm free. Samuel, I'm actually free, legally, officially free." Samuel let out a whoop of joy and pulled her out of the chair, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he immediately dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Grace Adams, I've been carrying this ring around for 6 months waiting for this moment. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my love for the rest of our lives?" Grace pulled him to his feet and kissed him soundly. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married a week later in Silver Creek, with what felt like the whole settlement turning out to celebrate. Mary and Daniel made the long journey from Fort Concho to attend, and Mary cried through the entire ceremony. The local minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Samuel kissed his bride, Grace felt a joy so complete it was almost painful. That night, in the cabin they'd built together, Samuel carried her over the threshold and set her down gently. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford." "I've been home for 2 years," Grace said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Home isn't a place, it's you." They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and clinging to each other. Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, tears of gratitude that she'd survived, that she'd found Samuel, that she'd been brave enough to run into those woods that day. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Samuel replied, pulling her closer. "And I will never stop protecting that love, protecting you, until my last breath." The years that followed were filled with hard work and happiness. Their horse ranch grew, gaining a reputation throughout New Mexico territory for quality stock and fair dealing. Grace's teaching expanded to include adult education in the evenings, and she became known as one of the best teachers in the region. Samuel proved himself not just a skilled rancher but a pillar of the community, serving as an advocate for families in difficult situations, and always ready to lend a hand to a neighbor in need. In the spring of 1887, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She'd been terrified at first, memories of Marcus and her fear of bringing a child into that violent situation still haunting her. But Samuel held her and reminded her that this child would be born into love, into safety, into a family where both parents cherished them. Their son was born in December of 1887, during the first snowfall of winter. They named him Daniel Thomas Ashford, after the friend who'd helped them and Samuel's mother, whose maiden name had been Thomas. Daniel had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment Samuel held him, Grace knew their son would never know the fear she'd experienced. He would grow up surrounded by love and security. 2 years later, a daughter joined them, Catherine Marie Ashford, with blonde hair like Grace's and a stubborn chin that suggested she'd be a force to be reckoned with. Samuel doted on both children, and Grace marveled at how gentle he was with them, how patient, how kind. He was everything a father should be, and watching him with their children healed something in her she hadn't even known was still broken. The years rolled on, marked by both joys and sorrows. The ranch prospered. Their children grew strong and healthy. Grace's teaching touched hundreds of young lives. Samuel's reputation spread, and more than once he helped other women escape dangerous situations, offering them work on the ranch or connecting them with resources to start over. In 1895, when their son Daniel was 7 and daughter Catherine was 5, they received word that Marcus Adams had died in a drunken brawl in San Angelo. Grace felt nothing when she heard the news, no relief, no satisfaction, no grief. That part of her life was so far behind her that Marcus felt like a character from a story, not someone who'd once had the power to hurt her. "How do you feel?" Samuel asked that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in shades of purple and gold. "Free," Grace said simply. "I've been free since the day I met you, but now it's complete. He can never hurt anyone ever again." Samuel pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of their children playing in the yard drifting up to them. This life, this beautiful, peaceful, love-filled life, was everything Grace had never dared to dream of during those dark years with Marcus. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For finding me in those woods. For saying I'd be safe. For keeping that promise every single day since." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You took a chance on a cowboy you didn't know. You trusted me when you had no reason to trust anyone. You built this life with me, worked beside me, loved me. I'm the luckiest man alive, Grace Ashford." As the sun dipped below the horizon and stars began to pepper the darkening sky, their children ran up onto the porch, demanding stories before bedtime. Samuel scooped up Catherine while Daniel climbed into Grace's lap, and together they went inside their warm, safe home. That night, after the children were tucked in and the house was quiet, Samuel and Grace lay in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been countless nights before. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Grace asked. "In the woods, I said a lot of things. You said he'd never find me, and you were right, he never did. But more than that, I found myself again. I found the person I was meant to be, the life I was meant to live. I found home." Samuel tightened his arms around her. "We both did." In the years that followed, they would add 2 more children to their family. A son they named Samuel Jr. in 1897 and another daughter, Rose, in 1899. Their ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Grace eventually opened a small school building in Silver Creek, with funds she'd saved from her teaching, ensuring that every child in the area had access to education. Their love never dimmed or faded, but instead grew deeper and richer with each passing year. They faced hardships together, droughts and harsh winters, illness and loss, but they faced everything as partners, as equals, as 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful together. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1910, their children now grown, some with families of their own, Samuel and Grace sat on the same porch where they'd spent countless evenings together. The ranch sprawled around them, a testament to decades of hard work and dedication. The school Grace had founded was now a permanent fixture of Silver Creek, with 2 full-time teachers carrying on her legacy. "Any regrets?" Samuel asked, his hair now silver at the temples, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his eyes still as warm and kind as they'd been that day in the woods. Grace looked at him, at this man who'd saved her life, and then spent every day since making that life worth living. She thought of their children, of the students she'd taught, of the women they'd helped escape dangerous situations over the years, of the community they'd helped build. "Not a single one," she said, leaning over to kiss him. "Not one single regret." Samuel smiled and pulled her close, and as the sun set over their New Mexico ranch, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Grace reflected on how far she'd come from that terrified woman running through the Texas woods. She'd been found by a cowboy who'd promised she'd be safe, and he'd kept that promise through 27 years of love, partnership, and unwavering devotion. She'd run from death that day in 1883 and found life instead, found love, found herself. And every morning when she woke up beside Samuel, she gave silent thanks for the courage it had taken to run, for the fortune that had led Samuel into those woods at exactly the right moment, and for every precious day they'd been given together since. Their story became something of a legend in Silver Creek, the tale of the woman who fled through the woods and the cowboy who found her, who promised her safety and gave her the world. Young couples would ask them for advice, and Grace always gave the same answer. "Love is a choice you make every single day. Choose each other, choose kindness, choose partnership, and you'll build something that lasts." Samuel would add, with a twinkle in his eye, "And never underestimate the power of keeping your promises." As the years rolled into decades, as their children gave them grandchildren and those grandchildren began having children of their own, Samuel and Grace remained the heart of their family and their community. They grew old together, their hands still finding each other across tables and in the darkness, their love a constant in a changing world. Samuel Ashford passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1923, at the age of 66, with Grace holding his hand. She grieved him deeply, but found comfort in knowing they'd had nearly 4 decades together. Decades filled with more love and happiness than most people experienced in several lifetimes. Grace lived another 10 years, remaining active in the community until her final days. She passed away in 1933 at the age of 73, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who'd all been raised on stories of how their grandfather had found their grandmother in the woods and promised she'd be safe. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together, their headstones bearing simple inscriptions. Samuel's read, "Beloved husband, father, friend, he kept his promises." Grace's read, "Beloved wife, mother, teacher, she found her courage." But the real testament to their lives wasn't carved in stone. It lived on in the children they'd raised, in the students Grace had taught, in the women they'd helped, in the community they'd nurtured, and in the enduring truth that love, real love, could heal even the deepest wounds and build something beautiful from the ashes of despair. The ranch continued on through their descendants. The school Grace founded still stands in Silver Creek, and the story of Samuel and Grace Ashford remains a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run toward hope, and sometimes miracles come in the form of a cowboy on a bay mare who says, "He'll never find you," and means it with every fiber of his being.